What's up guys, I'm Dave Klein. So, I was fortunate enough to play the first 50 minutes of Dark Souls 2, and there's actually a lot of new lore to dig into. A warning, this will spoil some of those initial lore findings in Dark Souls 2, so if you don't want that spoiled, click away now. You can also watch my beta lore video based off of the lore we could find from the beta. So, all that said, let's get started.
Perhaps you've seen it. Maybe in a dream. A murky, forgotten land. A place where souls may mend your ailing mind.
The past, the future, even the light. When the shadow carves its seal in man, they say it steals everything from him. In the end, it takes even memories of what he has lost. It leaves him a beast, hungry for spirits, called hollow by the living.
Long ago, in a walled-off land far to the north, a great king built a great kingdom. I believe they called it Lake.
There, they say, lies the power to restore the minds of the lost, the souls. One touched by the shadow will find himself at the rusted, ruined gates of that land, as were a gnat drawn helplessly into the flames.
Your wings will burn in anguish, time after time. For that is your fate. The fate of the cursed.
These pieces together are actually what comprises the prologue to the game. There's a little more to it from the visuals, and it seems like your character is following the advice of the narrator, who is seen as an old lady, and it leads them to this lake flowing with ghastly creatures reminiscent of New Londo, and you drop in. Upon dropping in, your character arrives at the location, Things Betwixt, an interesting name for an area, really, that could indicate it's more than just dropping into Drangleic. I've talked before in my lore speculations that there may be a time travel element, and I think Things Betwixt is more than what it seems for a number of reasons. The first being a line from the prologue, the past, the future, even the light, indicating multiple eras being affected by this undead curse. The second element that makes Things Betwixt more than what it seems is something we discover immediately upon playing the game. You enter a hut containing 3 elderly ladies and a 4th woman named Millibeth. Upon talking to Millibeth, you'll learn that the elderly ladies are the last remaining Firekeepers. That's right, these are the last Firekeepers! And furthermore, long ago, Firekeepers were commonplace. She indicates the 3 elderly women are sisters, but she'd been told there was a 4th. Now interestingly, from Things Betwixt, we wrap into the first town area, Majula. One of the first NPCs you happen across is Salden, a crestfallen warrior. Salden tells the player, long ago a woman called a Firekeeper watched over each bonfire. She kept the flame lit and guarded it from those who would extinguish it. I wonder where the Firekeepers went. They would seem to be at the Things Betwixt, but why doesn't Salden know this? The first thing these Firekeepers do is present you with a human effigy, and explain how many undead have traveled to Drangleic for a cure, all failing. Everyone in Majula knows that's why you're there, and all seem to think of the tale as a lie. So, like Dark Souls, we have a tale driving undead to a far-off land for possibly a hidden purpose. These 3 Firekeepers may be keeping the flames lit throughout all of Drangleic, and it seems to have the gameplay effect that, at least at the start of the game, you cannot level up through bonfires. There's a new character, reminiscent of the Maiden in Black, who will now level you up, the Emerald Herald. Take a good close look at this Emerald Herald. Does it remind you of anybody? How about now? The Emerald Herald seems to be the same character shown from the very first Dark Souls 2 trailer. On top of that, she's chock full of interesting dialogue. Are you the next monarch? Or merely a pawn of fate? Bearer of the curse, I'll remain by your side till this frail hope shatters. She will then hand you your Estus flask, and then delves into more incredibly interesting dialogue, which, before I go into, in my Dark Souls 2 beta lore video, I explained several of the lands and characters surrounding Drangleic, and I recommend watching that video for a better understanding of some of what I'll be referencing just now, if you haven't already. Go on and see the king. He made Drangleic what it once was. He peered at the essence of the soul, King Vendrick. Bearer of the curse, seek misery, for misery will lead you to greater, stronger souls. You will never meet the king with a soul so frail and pallid. Seek those whose names are unutterable, the four endowed with immense souls. Their souls will serve as beacons. Once you have found them, return here to me. It would seem the Emerald Herald is the gatekeeper, and I believe the scenes we saw in the first Dark Souls 2 trailer are what you are rewarded with after finding all of the souls she requires. Her sending you off on your next task, which would seem to be to find King Vendrick, and it could just be he's at the Castle of Dragons we've been seeing in the trailers. To add to these lands, I decided to start my game as the Explorer class, who I unfortunately can't share a picture of, but a lot of things struck me about the Explorer class and the reason I chose it. The first being, they resembled Domhnall of Xena, as on their headpiece there's a monocle which looks similar to Domhnall's glasses on his helmet. The headpiece in Dark Souls 2 is the Traveling Merchant Hat, which is described as hat worn by merchants from Lannifer, where blue represents knowledge. Wearing this increases item discovery. Lannifer is the farthest land to the south and follows a strict edict of isolationism. The rare visitor from Lannifer is always a little odd. The hat also boosts item discovery. The Explorer class gear is all described as traveling merchant gear, and in Dark Souls 1, Domhnall wears boots of the Explorer and is a traveling merchant, which makes me wonder if perhaps Lannifer and Xena are different names for the same land. We've heard the Covenants may play a bigger role in Dark Souls 2, and I got a small dose of this as well. Salden tells us, when you face danger, the Blue Sentinels will come to your aid. People are weak, but the Blue Sentinels watch over us in their benevolence. One of the merchants from the game, Moglin, is from the area of Vol'gin and has left to come to Drangleic. Moglin describes Vol'gin as a lively place vibrant with trade, very competitive of course. You have to grease the wheels to get anywhere. He then goes on to describe the Blue Sentinels of being somewhat of bullies. They control the trade in Vol'gin, and if you're on their side, all is well. But not so much if you don't agree with them or aren't one of them. You can't seem to open a shop if that's the case. Speaking on Vol'gin though, one of the details I was able to get was in the Falconer's Helm, which tells us domestic Vol'gin soldiers are infamously timid, so it is no wonder that this fierce band of mercenary falconers was hired to compensate. In practice, they serve as bodyguards for the affluent elite, and they serve well, such that nobody dares scrutinize their backgrounds. So, a few final lore notes for you guys that I think you'll enjoy. There's an item which I didn't have the chance to take an exact note of its description. Sublime Bone Dust, which upgrades Estus flasks. The description talks about a hero in the past who sacrificed himself to the flame. Could it be referring to the Link the Fire ending? And if so, we've heard talk that eras will be important in Dark Souls 2, so it's even possible that they'll toy with the idea of both endings being possible in different versions of the time. Another cool item I found, and props to John Quick, Dreaded Cone, and Ouroboros the Ninja for help on finding the item description. There is an NPC wielding what looked to be the Moonlight Greatsword, yet a blue version of it. Dreaded Cone decided to kill this NPC and took the item to help us discover it was called the Blue Moon Greatsword, and the item description led us to believe that it could possibly be a fake version of the Moonlight Greatsword. The blade of this greatsword shines like the brilliant rays of the moon. In the oldest legends, rarely spoken of today, it is said that the sword was born of a great white being. Then what explains the lifeless weapon? Perhaps there has been some mistake. Furthermore, Ouroboros the Ninja pointed out and realized there was no scaling of any sort on the Blue Moon Greatsword, not even in intelligence, further pointing to the possibility of it being a fake or a replica. The end of the description describes it as a sword that was born of a great white being. Seath the Scaleless? I think so. An item for sale by Moglin was the Ring of Whispers, ring worn by Roy the Explorer. Hear the inner voices of surrounding foes, useful for locating hidden enemies and perhaps a few other things as well. I didn't have a chance to test it out, but I wonder if there will be a visual indicator for these things, or if you'll actually have an audio indicator. Now, this relates more to gameplay, but people have been wondering. There seems to be various monoliths that we have seen in screenshots and concept art. At the moment, they don't seem to be lore related, but using the one in the first town, Majula, will say, I believe how many deaths you have. I can't remember the exact stat it shows, but I'm fairly certain that it actually gives you your stat on how many times you died, which would be pretty crazy. And finally, to end it off, I believe I found a new version of the pendant when choosing your starting class and equipment. Petrified something. It's described as an unidentified petrified object, pleasant to the touch despite its looks. A rare and peculiar thing, to be certain, but one without a known purpose. Alright guys, that wraps up my Dark Souls 2 Go Beyond Lore Edition. Make sure to check out my Dark Souls 2 lore from the beta if you haven't, as it contains a lot of great details about the lands and characters surrounding Dark Souls 2. Let me know your thoughts on all of my findings from the first 50 minutes of gameplay. I really tried to gather as much as I could, sacrificing playing the game itself, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and I can't wait to see what you think of the new info. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.